world. It's never going to happen. Mashiach has to come.
Yeah.
Amen. Okay, everybody, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Let's us learn the portion of Ba'aleischa, a beautiful, beautiful teaching of the Rebbe on this week's portion. Beautiful, beautiful teaching. So we are holding on page 132 in the portion. We are holding on Numbers chapter 9, verse number 1. We find a fascinating concept, a story in the Torah, a mitzvah in the Torah, something truly beautiful that is written in this week's Parsha. So let's start. Ready? Text number 1a. And God spoke to Moshe b'midbar Sinai in the desert of Sinai. Bashana Hashenis, in the second year. L'tzeisa me'eretz Mitzrayim, when they went out of Egypt. B'chodesh harishain leimer, in the first month. So the Jewish people went out in the month of Nisan. In the month of Nisan, the next year, right? The month of Nisan, and they received the Torah in the month of Sivan. In the month of Nisan, next year, Bashana Hashenis, the second year, is where the dedication of the temple, right? The temple was built. It was a Chodesh Nisan, and the Eibishter gave them a mitzvah, right? And what was that mitzvah? The mitzvah of bringing a korban Pesach. Really, they're only supposed to bring the korban Pesach when they came into Israel. So they did the korban Pesach in Mitzrayim. That was the first time. Before they went out of Egypt, they brought a korban, a Paschal lamb. Then we went to Mount Sinai, and God said, gave them the mitzvahs of the Torah, and one of the mitzvahs was when it came to Israel, they would go in, they would make a korban Pesach. Suddenly, out of the blue, right? The blue, it came Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and God told the Jewish people, even though I want you to do the korban Pesach in Israel, I want you to do the korban Pesach now in the desert. This was an amazing event. You don't realize that event. So God comes suddenly and says, you know what? I am not going to wait for you to go into the land of Israel. You haven't been in the land yet. I want you to bring the korban Pesach. Amazing story. Amazing situation. That's something unbelievable. So the Torah continues, Vayasu, and the Jewish people were amazed. Wow, unbelievable. Suddenly the Eibishter changes his mind, right? God loves us. He changed his mind. He wants us to do something that really is out of schedule. And Vayasu is a Pesach, and the Jewish people are so happy. They made the Pesach in the desert of Sinai. They made the Pesach. What an amazing story. And they made it. They did what God wanted from them on the 14th of the month. They did in accordance with all that God has instructed to Moshe. What an amazing sin. So Rashi says, that's what Rashi, we know, the Sefri 1c. This is what it says, the praises of Israel, they did precisely that Moshe Rabbeinu instructed. They were all inspired that they didn't have to wait to go into Israel to bring this korban. They were so happy that God has told them that they can bring a korban. Now we understand the continuation of the story. Since this was like off the guard, so to say, it was out of context, so to say. So therefore, suddenly there were certain people who were caught offhand. Of God, offhand, whatever you want to call it. And they were tamil nefesh. They were tummy. They were impure. So that's what happened. The verse continues. Text number 2. There were suddenly people that were tummy. They couldn't bring the korban Pesach, right? Because it was too late now. We're holding already Pesach is in a week. We got a problem, right? Because we know that the first 8 days from Rosh Chodesh Nisan until the 8 days. They were busy with the dedication of the temple, right? And suddenly now, bingo, on the 8th day, Abish says 4 days from now, or 8, 9, 10, 6 days from now is gonna be the carbon. Gonna be a carbon pesach. Now some people cannot become pure. They need 7 days of purity, etc. The whole process. So now we have a problem. So God says, So here the Abish to get something to the Jewish people, gave them a chance to do the carbon pesach, and now we cannot do it. So we know God responds. God says, Pesach Sheni, right? So God says, don't worry, since you have such a great desire, I'm going to give you a Pesach Sheni because of your desire. Because of your desire to bring the carbon Pesach, I give you Pesach Sheni. And not only did Pesach Sheni become, for those Jews in the desert, Pesach Sheni became a concept in history because of that story. So here we see the Torah tells us in this week's Parsha the love of God to the Jewish people, that He gave them a mitzvah to do the carbon Pesach in the desert. And because of that, the love of the Jews to God, that they wanted to do it. And God gave them. So we see this whole love situation. All in love. I love you, you love me. One happy family. So, and God, this is unusual, right? That's why, so it's an unusual situation that the Jewish people should come and they should say, we want to have a second chance. No second chances, seemingly, right? Why should there be? You tell me, what should we do? Sorry, but we can't help you, right? Right? If you miss there's a general statement in the Gemara, Avazmanai bata karbanai, that if you pass the time, right? If I didn't put on tefillin today, can't put on tefillin tomorrow twice. You missed today, and it's gone. The mitzvah is gone, and you cannot do it again today. You do it tomorrow. You missed the mitzvah. You missed the mitzvah. Oh, here God says no. You missed it. I'm going to give you another chance. It's very unusual. We only find very unusual. So you don't have to even do tshuva. This is a mitzvah. You don't have to do tshuva. The Eibusha says, you missed the mitzvah, I'll give you another chance by this mitzvah. Okay, so we're introduced to a phenomenal story that happened in the desert, whether you realize by reading the Parsha, this phenomenal story that happened in the desert, something that's unusual, because the whole thing was unusual in essence. God asking the Jews to do something that was unusual, and then the Jews asking from God to do the unusual thing, to have a second chance, and God responds in a positive. Really, what's truly amazing of the story is in the time-wise of the story, in the time of the story. You go to the beginning of the book of Numbers, text number 3, page 134. If you go to the beginning of the book of Numbers, all the way in the beginning, and you have the 2 verses in front of you, text number 1, text number 3. So you have the beginning of Parshas Bamidbar. So you look at the Parsha, it says, and the first day of the second month, of the second year that the exodus of Egypt, God spoke to Moshe at Mount Sinai, the 10th minute, saying, count the congregation of Israel. No? Starts off Parshas Bamidbar on the first day of the second month. Then in chapter 9, it says on the first day of the first month.
Interesting. Many people to feed for dinner. How many desserts did you eat?
What's going on over here? We start the Parsha, we start the book of Bamidbar with the first day of the second month, which is the month of Iyar. And we're holding chapter 9, verse number 1. And the Torah says that God spoke to Moses on the first day of the first month, which is the month of Nisan. Yabashem Minasine, the Talmud Bachayda Shadishan. Layman. One. God spoke to Moses in the desert of Sinai in the first month, the second year. The first month. I forget about the first day. Take out the first day. That was the first month. The first month. 1A. Oh, 1A says the first day of the first month of the second year. They're both in the second year. 1A, page 132. And God spoke to Moshe in the desert of Sinai the first month of the second year. And then in this verse it says that God spoke to Moshe on the first day of the second month. Okay. So we're going 9 months. We are in the beginning of the Torah. Talks about the first month, the second month, the month of year in the second year. And the second portion in chapter 9, which is we're holding already Parsha's Ba'aleischa, the Torah says in the first month in the second year of going out of Eden. Chapter 9 is the first month.
Is the first. This is chapter 1. 3 is chapter 1.
You need a blackboard. Yeah.
Okay, so again, okay, let's listen, because we're on. So in essence, the Torah starts off the book of Bamidbar on the second month of the second year, and then in chapter 9, it says on the first month in the second year.
Like he changed his mind.
No, there's not a chronological order. That's the problem, right? The problem is that the Torah starts off in the first month, and 9 chapters later, he goes back to the first month. He starts off in the second month, and he goes back to the first month. So why would the Torah do that? Why would the Torah do it? So we have a general rule. We know there's a general rule. I'm sure if you learn Chitas, you know this general rule in text number 4. There's no order of events in the Torah. It's not chronologically ordered. That's the general rule. So l'chayra, what's the question? No, you're right. The Torah starts off the book of Numbers in the second month, and in the middle of the book of Numbers, he's back to the first month. So he goes back a month earlier. Okay. But that is not the general rule. I mean, it is general rule, but there has to be a reason that the Torah doesn't go in chronological order. You're right, there's no chronological order, but there is a reason why there's no chronological order. That means you have to learn something from it. There's something you need to learn from it. That's why the Nachmanides writes in 4b, the entire Torah is in chronological order, except for those occasions when the Torah is specific that the dates are not in order. Even in those cases, it's for a good reason and a proper purpose. So even though there's no chronological order, but there's a reason why no chronological. Not that the Torah is not a chronological order. Don't take the statement there's no chronological order. Basically, there's no chronological order. Therefore, there's no reason. No, there is a reason. The Torah is in chronological order, and there's a reason why the Torah tells us why you have to look into why the Torah start off with in the whole book of Numbers in the second month, and then in chapter 9 in Ba'aleischa, he suddenly goes back to the first month. Relax. No, because I'm going to make the question more. The Rebbe wants to make the question more. Look at the Rebbe says, why does the Torah, you asked the question before, why does the Torah start off with Bereshis? It's a general question. Bereshis is chronological order, but because that's the first thing, God created the world. But why does the Chazal are still, Rashi is questioning, why does the Torah start off with Bereshis? The Torah should start off, the Torah is the book of laws. So why would the Torah start off with a story. If you're to talk, the Torah is a book of stories, then you have chronological order. It's a history. It's a history book. If you're writing a history book, you got to go in chronological order. It doesn't make sense to talk history and go back and forth. So you want to have a talk of history, it's a chronological order. But the Torah is not a history book. Torah is a book of laws. It's Torah, Melashon Torah. Torah is a book to tell us the way to live. So why does the Torah talk about creation? Why does the Torah talk about creation? So therefore, Rashi says, the reason why the Torah talks about creation is in text number 5. If the nations of the world are going to say, should the nations of the world ever accuse the Jews of stealing the land of Israel, the land of the 7 nations, the Jewish people respond, the whole world belongs to God. He created and gave it to people he chose. It was his choice to give it, to gift it to the Canaanites, as you said before. And it's also his choice to take it from them and gift it to us. And that's it. That's the answer. The Eibishter gave it to whoever he wants. Is the boss. Good to be boss. Good to be king. And God, good to be the creator. You can create, since he's the creator, he creates everything. In essence, let's stick to the topic. In essence, what Rashi is saying, it's brought down that the Gemara is saying, the Torah in generally wants to start off in every book of the Torah always wants to start off about a positive concept. A positive concept, right? Torah wants to start off in the positive. So therefore, the Torah starts off the whole book in a concept of a positive aspect to the Jewish people. The Eibishter could have started off much later, the Torah, but the Torah wants to talk about his love to Jews, and that's what Rashi says. The Torah wants to start off the aspect of his love for Jews, and therefore he starts with Bereshis. Because why? To say that the Eibishter chose the Jewish nation, and by choosing the Jewish nation, he chose a land, and the land was the land of Israel, and that's his choice, and that's what God wanted, and that's so now, based on that concept, that the Torah wants to start off with a positive concept, so too, in essence, the Torah starts off every book of the Torah in a positive concept. So what's Shemai start off? Shemai B'nai Yisrael. These are the names of the children of Israel. Abraham, the story of the tribes. Starts off, then it goes into the negative of Egypt. But it starts off with a positive. Starts off with a positive. Vayikra Hashem Moshe, and God calls to Moshe Rabbeinu and tells Moshe Rabbeinu how he's going to have a relationship with the Jewish people, the korbanos, the sacrificial offerings. So too comes Bamidbar. Bamidbar, which is this book we're holding in the book of the Bamidbar. The Torah starts off with a positive. What? To count the Jewish people. I love the Jewish people, right? It's interesting. We call it Bamidbar, the book of desert. It really should be called the book of that's why it's called the book of Numbers. And it's really Bab Midbar, the book of desert. It's really that's the Hebrew name of it. But we call the book of Numbers. Why? Because the counting of the Jewish people. So that's where the Torah starts off, the counting of the Jewish people. So the Gemara says, Rashi says, why did the Torah start off with that? God counts the Jewish people all in time because he loves them. And they emerged from bondage of Egypt, God counted them. After they worshipped the golden calf, and many died in the plague, God counted them to determine how many were survived. The tabernacle was erected on the 1st of Nisan, and indeed, on the 1st of the following month of year, God counted them. So Rashi says in essence, that the Torah starts off with the counting of the Jews, was God loved them.
Wouldn't it be weird if slaves and now we have to
You don't have to say we're slaves. You just gotta
just like where did we come? How did we get here? What are we doing?
there could be a separate book. A separate book. Not a problem. You have Tanakh. You have the history. Divrei Hayamim. The Chronicle. You have a book called Divrei Hayamim. the the chronicles of history. You have a lot of books. You don't have to have the Chamish Chumsha Torah to start off that way. So you can. I'm not saying it shouldn't be brought down, but why need to be brought down the 5 books of Moses? Why is it important for that? It's not. They're not important to tell us things that. It's not a book of again. It's not just a history book. Again, you can understand it through many different ways. You can understand it. First of all, in the aspect of creation, is 30. You understand creation from the beginning of the Torah. You understand creation? No, we don't understand creation. It's a fact. It's telling you a fact.
Everything comes from 5 books of Moses, and everything else. Commentary on that or commentary on the top? That's right or wrong?
No, that's not totally right because in Tanakh, you have Tanakh. Tanakh is the 24 books of the Torah. Not only the Torah, the prophets. You can have the prophets. You can have, as I said, the chronicles are in the prophets, the Ksuvim. So you can have. I'm not. Again, but it's more elaborated self and so. So you could have had one verse, Bereshit Balakim, God created heaven, that's it, and the Jewish people.
I love Rashi.
I fully comprehend that. I'm not saying that we. Ultimately, the Gemara says that why Taka doesn't say all this because you learn from the story more than you learn from the law, and therefore it's important for us to have stories and it pulls you in. So that's a beautiful thing. So I agree with you. So that's ultimately one of the reasons. But really. The question still arises, Torah is a book of laws. It's not a book of stories. And we really should be a concept of law more than a book of stories. So the truth is that the law, in essence, the stories, the reason why there are stories, maybe, or even the creation of the world, is again, that the Torah wants to say that's a relationship. It's more than just the law. There's a relationship going on over here. There's a relationship, and we should base our relationship with God and the law based on this relationship. And if you base it on a relationship, it's much more, you'll accomplish it in a much better way. So the Rebbe, going with you, and the Rebbe says, if the Torah wants to start off with a concept of love, maybe should love the Jewish people. Maybe should love the Jewish people in creation of the world. Maybe should love the Jewish people in going out of Egypt. Maybe should love the Jewish people. I said, on Kiddush, when you make Kiddush Friday night, and we say Havdalah, they're almost the same expression. There's 3 things you have to remember. You have to remember when on Friday night, when you come on Friday night to say the Kiddush, there are 3 things that you need to remember. Zachar Hashem HaShabbos L'Katshay. Remember the day of Shabbos to make it holy, to keep it Shabbos. Now, in which way you are Zachar Hashem HaShabbos? How do you remember the Shabbos? What is the meaning? We make Kiddush on Friday night because of that pasuk in the Torah. Remember the day of Shabbos. Zachreyu ala yayin. Allah says, right? The Gemara says, Zachreyu ala yayin. Remember it on wine. And that's making Kiddush on Friday night. So what is the Kiddush do we make on Friday night? When we make on Friday night and we say Kiddush, I hope you all remember the Kiddush that you make on Friday night. You all right?
Did something he said.
Oh, okay. The Fush Lema. Zikarin. So there's 3 things that we remember. Zikarin lemaise bereshis. It's a remembrance of the creation of the world. It's a remembering of going out of Egypt. And kivan of achayt of a son of kiddush b'kolam. It's remembrance of Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. Kivan of achayt, the Abish chose the Jewish nation. 3 things you need to remember, right? You need to remember the Shabbos of Bereshis, the first Shabbos of creation. You need to remember that it's not enough that God created the world, but God gave us freedom, right? He took us out of Mitzrayim. And without taking us out of Mitzrayim, we wouldn't be able to keep the Shabbos, right? Because we would be slaves. And number 3 is the most important reason why we to remember is that it's a mitzvah. Kivanu v'chaytem mikol ha'amim. Kivanu v'chaytem v'sanu kidashtem mikol ha'amim. Because you have chosen us and sanctified us amongst the nations. Shabbos is a day that elevates every Jew. It doesn't only remind us of going out of creation, doesn't only remind us of going out of Egypt, that we are not slaves anymore, where we can serve God. It also reminds us who we are. Shabbos reminds us that we are a holy nation. What he's saying now, Havdalah, the same thing. So now we're leaving Shabbos, and we're going to be leaving Shabbos, right? We're saying Havdalah. We're going out of the Shabbos. We are going into the weekday. What do we say? We say the same thing. We say, Hamavdil ben Kodesh l'choil, right? From the Shabbos back to the weekday. That's remembrance of the day of creation. Ben oil l'choshech, between what's light and what's dark. Yetzias Mitzrayim, between going out of slavery and going into light. Ben Yisrael la'amim, between the Jewish nation and the rest of the world. Understand? So you have to remember that the day of Shabbos, throughout the 24 hours of Shabbos, you got to remember these three concepts, right? The creation of the world, God created the world. Why did he create the world? Because he loved the Jews. And Yetzias Mitzrayim, why did he take us out of Mitzrayim? Because he loves the Jews. And ultimately he gave us a Torah. The Abishah chose the Jewish nation to give them the Torah. Which why? Because he loved the Jews.
But he did shop it around.
Right?
He did.
Because he has to
offer it to other people.
Correct. Okay. So Baruch Hashem. Because love goes two ways. Love goes two ways. Same way, every person marries the person he's basher to marry, but you still go on a date, you still go out shopping, and ultimately you choose the basher that God chose you, even though you asked a bunch of others and they told you go blow. So and they dropped you. Everything is basher. Baruch Hashem. One of them said yes. That's it. Okay, weiter. So the Rebbe asks a question. She says, reason why the Torah starts with the census is because God loved the Jewish people. Wouldn't the story of Pesach be a greater love than the love of counting the Jews?
What?
The love of giving them the Korban Pesach, to let them do the Korban Pesach. Wouldn't that show a greater love? That would show a greater love than the counting of the Jews. Why did the Torah start off with the second one? Because Rashi says, because God shows the counting of the Jews, he loves the Jews. Why wouldn't the story of this week's Parsha, Ba'alaischa, where God says to the Jewish people, I'm giving you to make the Korban Pesach, the first Korban Pesach, and then those who are impure, I'm giving you to do the second one. Wouldn't that show a greater love? That shows a much deeper love. Why not? He gave a mitzvah that they didn't have. He gave a mitzvah they were not obligated to do. I think he knows the number of the Jews without counting. Here he gave them a mitzvah. He gave them a mitzvah which really they did not obligated to do. And he gave them this mitzvah because he loves them. And then even more, furthermore, even if people come and say they're tummy, they're impure. And nevertheless, you should tell them, listen, you're impure, what should we do? Nevertheless, God says, I love you, and I'll give you a second chance, which is not found in any other mitzvah. So, why didn't the Torah? That's really the question. You're right, there's no chronological order. But l'chayra, seemingly, this is a great love that God showed in this week's Parsha, the Jewish nation. The Torah should have gone in chronological order in this situation. The Torah should have put the story of the Korban Pesach, the Jewish people were told to bring the Korban Pesach, should have started off Parshas Bamidbar. because that's the chronological order. That happened in the first month, and the counting of the Jews happened in the second. Let's look at the way the Rebbe says in text number 7. God issued a special commandment after the tabernacle was erected, for which the Jews were otherwise exempt in the desert. This demonstrates the greatness and God's love for them. Then there is in fact that the Jewish people fulfilled this command perfectly in accordance with all that God has commanded Moshe. Furthermore, this story flatters the Jews by demonstrating just how much they yearn to fulfill the commandment.
Yearn?
There were Jews who were impure, and they yearned to fulfill this commandment. Even those who were impure by virtue of contact to the dead body and could not bring the offering demanded and argued, why should we lose out on bringing this offering at a appointed time? I want you to realize the great mitzvah of Korban Pesach, to bring a Korban Pesach, and why you're building a Beis Hamikdash, that the Beis Hamikdash should be built to be able to bring this Korban Pesach. We cannot bring the Korban Pesach now. And we know we cannot bring the Korban Pesach, right? That doesn't help me that if you cannot bring, you're not obligated to bring. No, cannot bring, but I want to bring it. I'm yearning for this mitzvah. The Torah says if a person doesn't bring a Korban Pesach, that could bring he's cut off from God.
We have to remember that the reason we have it was because he was elevating us in our captivity. So we'd be.
It's separate. But the Torah says, the Torah says, there's many mitzvahs. But again, the Torah says if you don't bring a Korban Pesach, you get cut. You don't find that in many mitzvahs. So therefore, you understand why the Jewish people yearn for this mitzvah, right? The Abishah said, really, they were not obligated in the desert. Just like we're not obligated now. We're in Gullus. We're not obligated. But just because you're not obligated doesn't mean that you did the mitzvah. You didn't do the mitzvah in thousands of years. Jews should yearn the Mashiach should come so we can do this mitzvah. Parsha should do the mitzvah, Korban Pesach. It's a shame. The Mashiach comes now, we'll have to wait till Pesach to do this mitzvah, right? If Mashiach would have come before the month of Iyar, we might have been done Pesach Sheni. We had a second chance for Pesach Sheni. But right now, we'll have to wait till next year, month of Nisan, to bring the Korban Pesach, right? So you see something unusual. You see the love of Jews to this mitzvah that you don't find in any other thing where they said they didn't demand. Why can't we do it? Well, why did they demand? We want to bring truma. We want to give they didn't demand. Over here, suddenly, the Jewish people have lost they want to do it. They want to do it. Realize the greatness of this carbon. They realize the specialty of this carbon, right? The sacrifice. Why should we lose out from bringing? And because of that yearning, God's love for the Jewish people is further expressed. But if I accept the demand, and here God accepts their demand. And here God says, you know what? I'm going to make a Korban Pesach Sheni. I'm going to come up with this mitzvah alone. For this mitzvah, only mitzvah in the Torah, that the Torah tells you, I'm going to give you another chance for this carbon. I'm going to give you another chance to bring this Korban Pesach Sheni. It's a truly amazing story. You don't realize. He granted them opportunity to fill the gap by providing makeup date for the Pesach offering. But this is an amazing question. This is truly an amazing question. Why this story? If you understand this story, what happened in this week's Parsha? That first of all, God says, I'm giving the Jewish people a mitzvah to bring a Korban Pesach, even though they don't have to do it. I'm going to override that. I'm going to say, bring a Korban because I'm in love with this Korban. And the Jewish people saying, wow, we are impure. Whatever the couple of Jews, how many Jews were impure? We're impure. We want to bring. Wow, yes, I'm going to give you a second chance to bring the Korban. So isn't this a beautiful story? You should know Rashi's bothered with this. And if you learn Chitas, you know the answer. Rashi's bothered with it. And Rashi answers. Rashi, so Rashi, Numbers 9:1, first Rashi in that chapter, Rashi says, why did Torah not begin with the Paschal offering? And Rashi answers, because it's a disgrace to the Jews that throughout the 40 years of their journey in the desert, they didn't only brought this Paschal offering. Ultimately, the Jews were in the desert for 40 years. And they never ever brought again this Pesach, carbon Pesach. They only brought that because they were commanded that year, the second year, the first month. So they only commanded that year to bring the carbon. So they brought it. And there were those that were yearning to bring it, and God said, I'll give you Pesach Sheni. And then we have the story of the Meraglin, of the spies. And now the Jewish people are in the desert for 40 years. They didn't bring Carbon Pesach for the next 40 years. They didn't ask.
Why?
Because they didn't ask.
Who didn't ask?
The Jews didn't ask.
Wow.
They didn't ask. They didn't ask. And there's reasons why they didn't ask. But they didn't ask.
Lost track of time. And
They didn't lose any track of time. They had a clock. That Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron, they didn't ask. They didn't ask. Some people say they didn't ask because they didn't circumcise their children either. So they didn't circumcise their children for the 40 years. And therefore, they didn't want to bring the carbon to minimize the children.
Why?
To exclude those Jews who were not circumcised. Okay, whatever. They didn't ask. So for 40 years, so now, even though this story is phenomenal, at that moment, it was a phenomenal story, a phenomenal love story between God and the Jews and God. But then it soured a little bit. And that souring is a negative to the story. And God doesn't want to remind people of that negative. And therefore, he starts off in the second month. He puts this story in the middle, chapter 9. Chapter 9. It's a beautiful story, but it's not the highlight of the story. The highlight is the counting of the Jewish people. God loves the Jews. But that he showed unbelievable, it's a little souring to the story. And therefore, it was souring. The question really demands a bigger question. What would you say is the biggest question over here?
Why didn't they want to do it?
Okay, I told you the reasons. There's a bigger question to that. There's a bigger question. And the question is, what happened to Moses? What happened to Moses in the story? So that's the question. Where was Moshe Rabbeinu in the story? Okay, that's the question. Now, where's Moshe Rabbeinu? Where was he? He's silent in the story, right? He's silent. We'll soon see a beautiful thing that Rebbe explains. So where was Moshe Rabbeinu? Well, before we get to that, right? The Rabbi Yehuda Loew says, the Manam in Prague, he says in text number 9, an exception from a mitzvah, exemption from a mitzvah, is not equivalent doing the mitzvah. When we say one who's unable to is exempt by God, we mean that there's no punishment. Nevertheless, it's not the same thing that the mitzvah received in the merit. Here too, though they're exempted, it was a missed opportunity. And that's the sadness of the story. Mm-hmm. So the Taka exempted. God only said to bring the Carbon Pesach only that year. The year they went out of the second year going out of Egypt. So now they're in the desert 40 years. They're exempt from doing it because they're never commanded to do it. But they didn't do it.
They didn't ask.
And they didn't ask.
That's to teach us the same. Yeah, we're not asking.
We're not asking. You're asking. The Paschal lamb is, see, you're not one person, you're everything. The Paschal lamb is different from all other commandments that were not obligatory in the desert. Those commandments were only active when they entered in Israel. Paschal offering was already offered in the desert once before in this week's Parsha. And the Jews were exempt in the ensuing years. Therefore, missing out on this mitzvah is considered a loss despite its exemption. And therefore, it's a sad story in a way. It's a sad story. So the Rebbe says, text number 10, even a child wonders why the Jews didn't demand the Paschal offering during the 39 years. Why didn't they demand? What happened? Why should we lose out? Why suddenly, right? Why did they not tell God that they wanted to bring a Paschal offering, especially since they knew that this offering saved them from Egypt and brought them into redemption? When a mere handful of Jews demand, why should we lose out? God granted them the opportunity to bring the Paschal offering. If all Jews would have pleaded for an opportunity to bring the Paschal offering, God would have surely consented. But there was silence. All good reasons, as I said, there are reasons why they were silent, but it doesn't help you. They were silent. It was therefore disgraceful that throughout the 40 years of the sojourn in the desert, they only brought this one Paschal offering. Had they demanded of God, why should we lose out? They surely would have succeeded and been permitted to bring the Paschal offering to the 40 years of the desert. It's not one time though, because when they knew that the Mount Sinai were commanded to do the Paschal offering when they come to Israel, so they knew it was not a one-time event.
The Torah clearly said you're supposed to have Pesach every year.
Correct. So they knew that was, yeah. So they knew that they knew.
They were commanded.
No, the command they're going to come to Israel again. Those commands will come to Israel. That command was when they come to Israel. So this is so you're right. They were not commanded, and that's why this week's Parsha is important, because here suddenly there was a command that you should do it in its time, which is special for that year. So that's understood. It was special for that year. The question is, when there came the third year, they should have said, we want to bring the carbon Pesach. The fourth year, the fifth year, the sixth.
But they didn't think it was a command.
See, the truth is, we know that from the Meraglim, God excommunicated in a way the Jewish people. He didn't have any more that relationship that he had before the Meraglim. The Meraglim created a great disconnect between the Eibush and the Jewish people. It was like a gullus. They were like in gullus. They were like in exile until the passing of all the Jews. They all died. The men. Okay. The question I asked before is, where is Moshe Rabbeinu? Where's Moshe Rabbeinu in the story? What? Right. So why I can say why maybe you can give reason why the Jewish people didn't demand, but the question is asked where was Moshe? What Moshe?
After Moses hit the rock.
No, it's before. It's before.
Before he hit the rock. I'm trying to just think.
Before. Rashi said today that Moshe Rabbeinu turns to his father-in-law and said, "We're going to Israel. Come with us." So he thought he was going to Israel. So this is before the hitting. The Rebbe says you have to know who Moshe Rabbeinu was. If you know who Moshe Rabbeinu is, then you understand what is the meaning of caring about others. Because Moshe Rabbeinu was the leader. He was the leader of the Jewish nation. And we all have to learn from Moshe Rabbeinu this lesson of what means about being in leadership in general, and more specific, what means about caring about somebody else. So the Rebbe says as follows, text number 11. True leadership are primarily completely invested in thinking about the people and doing things for the people. Moshe even risked his life for the Jewish people. He didn't merely risk his life, body life, he also risked his spiritual life. As he says to God, if you don't forgive the Jewish people, erase me from the book you wrote. Moshe Rabbeinu only thought about Jews. That's what he thought. He thought about Yidden. Now, if you understand that when Moshe Rabbeinu was a person that didn't think about himself, was not important about himself, was important only about Yidden, So now the Rebbe says in text number 12, that Moshe and Aaron pleaded for the privilege of offering the Paschal lamb, it would have been granted to them and to all the Jews. However, this would have been compounded the disgrace of the Jewish people. It would have demonstrated that the Jews could have secured the privilege of this offering with this simple request, but they didn't. Shabbat said to himself, I'm not going to be the one who's going to ask. No, yes, the Abish will answer. The Abish will answer because of me. He'll say, okay, bring the carbon Pesach. And without, what would that show? That would show that thank God that they have a Moshe Rabbeinu. Because if they didn't have Moshe Rabbeinu, they wouldn't have done it. Moshe Rabbeinu was waiting for the people. The people didn't ask. Again, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted, this is an important thing, that a person, a leader needs to be a leader of his people. And he has to know what the people want and what the people don't want. And sometimes there's an expression in the Gemara. It's better sometimes that people should do something by mistake than they should do it intentionally. Right? So if you're going to tell them something and then they're not going to do it, they're not going to do it intentionally. They're going to be amazed. So you have to be careful. You have to be careful. To preserve the people's dignity, the faithful shepherd forwent the spiritual gain they could have accrued for pleading for and bringing the non-obligated offering. So Moshe Rabbeinu decided, if the people don't want, they're not obligated. If they were obligated, then self-understood. He has an obligation to lead them and make them do an obligation. But since they were not obligated, it had to come only from them, right? If it didn't come from them, they're not obligated. Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, wow, how is it possible? I want to be obligated. A Jew should want to be obligated, but they don't want to be obligated. If they don't want to be obligated, I have to put myself aside. It was an obligation to bring the carbon. Moshe Rabbeinu could not have said, I'm going to put myself aside. But since it was not obligation, it was only because the people came forward and said, La Manigara. The people should have come forward and said, La Manigara. The people should have come forward and said, why should we lose again to do the carbon? But the people did not. The people did not come forward. And the people did not come forward. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to embarrass the people. Why are you not coming forward? What's going on with you? Why are you guys sleeping? And not to embarrass the people, he kept quiet. That's the lesson. That's the lesson. That's the lesson. How important is to sometimes keep silent.
That's why the Rebbe sometimes doesn't answer when you ask.
Okay. And the beautiful story, the story of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin and the story of the books. So he brings out over here in this class over here, text number 13, a statement that the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe's wife, said about a Rebbe. What is a Rebbe? So she said, the lawyer, did your father own anything? He asked a question from the Rebbetzin, who was the daughter of the previous Lubavitch Rebbe. The lawyer asked her, did your father, the previous Lubavitch Rebbe, own anything? Things. His library, his books, weren't they his personal property? Did your father own anything? So she said no. Surprised, they said, what do you mean when you say no? Doesn't your father, previous Lubavitch Rebbe, have personal property? So her response was no. My father, the Rebbe, was the property of his Chassidim. Belonged to Chabad, and there's nothing that he himself personally owns. Dan, that was Moshe Rabbeinu. He didn't own whatever he owned. It was the people. It was the people. That's a true entity, that a true concept of leadership, of a leader. That's the true concept of why many of us are not leaders. Because we're selfish. We are grabbing onto things that we own. And we think we own, or we actually own. That's why the Mishnah says, a person that says what is mine is yours and what's yours is a chassid. The person that says what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. That says what's mine is yours. What's mine is yours. Well, I don't have mine. Don't just think it's mine. It's a chassid. It's a high level. It's a high level. It's not an easy thing to do. That's not the way humans do things. The way humans are, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. That's fine. That's a regular person. So what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. That's not a Rebbe. That's not Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu says, if the people don't want it, then I don't want it. I'm not going to embarrass the people. To show the people that I'm greater than them. Because they didn't come forward. They didn't come forward. That's the truth. That's the story. They didn't come forward. Nobody came forward. Nobody came forward. So let's go see another story of Moshe Rabbeinu to explain this a little bit more. Moshe Rabbeinu. Understand Moshe Rabbeinu. Truth is, the Arizal says we all have a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu. So we all have this spark in us to be a Moshe Rabbeinu. So Dorashab Simloi, text number 14. Why did our teacher Moshe desire to enter Israel? Was his desires of the fruits or its bounty? What did Moshe Rabbeinu want to taste the fruits of Israel? Parsha, that's what he was yearning. He wanted to have the wealth of Israel. Why do you want to go into Israel so much? No. Now this is what the Moshe Rabbeinu was thinking. The Jews were giving many commandments that can only be fulfilled in Israel. I want to enter the land to fulfill them all. That's it. He said, L'Poel, in the desert it's wonderful, and we're wonderful Jews, but there are thousands of mitzvahs that I cannot do. Not thousands, but each mitzvah that it has thousands of other, ramifications. So if this is the Medrash on this story has as follows the discussion. Medrash tells you the background of this statement. God said to Moshe, how can you desire to enter the land? You have this desire. Okay, enough is enough, because Moshe Rabbeinu prayed 515 times, right? To go in the land. Tried all avenues to get into the land. So ultimately, God said the following. He had to bring this to a stop. He said, Moshe Rabbeinu, stop praying. Right? He said, enough is enough.
Don't talk about
it anymore, right? So why? Because he gave him the following analogy. This can be compared to a shepherd who led the king's flock to grazing grounds, and the flock was captured. When the shepherd sought to enter the palace, he was not entering. The king explained, if you enter now, what will people think? That you stole the sheep. Coming into the land without your nation. Coming to the palace without the sheep. We're the sheep. Should be with the sheep. Famous story of the non-Jewish doctor in the Holocaust who went with the kids, right? The famous doctor. I forgot his name right now. I call him famous and I forgot the name. But I'm bad in names. So yeah, famous story.
Korsak.
Thank you very much. So there was a doctor who was a non-Jewish, and he took care of an orphanage with like 100 children. And the Germans in Machshmar said, that we take the children, you can go home. Right? Because you're not Jewish, go home. And he said, no. He died with murder with the children. The men and children. Here too, God says to Moshe, it is praiseworthy to lead 600,000 Jews from captivity in Egypt, bury them all in the desert, and then lead a new generation into Israel. People say that the generation that was buried in the desert have no share in the world to come. Rather, remain by their side and be buried with them. Only enter with them when they will enter in the future. Right? Therefore, he stayed with them, stayed with his generation. Scripture, and that's when Moshe Rabbeinu stops. When Moshe Rabbeinu hears this analogy from God, he says, okay, you're right. You're right. You're right. Even though I wanted my spiritual gain, but you know what? You're right. Look, he says, look at the words in the next scripture. It's powerful. Scripture therefore states, you will not bring this congregation, meaning rather you will lead the congregation that emerged from Egypt with you. And Moshe Rabbeinu answers, which is the end of the story. Dear God, many may Moses and hundreds like him die, rather than harm a single toenail of the people. Moshe Rabbeinu ultimately agrees with the Eibishter. He says, you know what? I will die. I'll die in the desert. I'll give up all my spiritual yearnings and all my spiritual desires of the land. I'll give up all my mitzvahs that I could have done in the land of Israel. You know why? Because I want that every one of these Jews will come back with me when Mashiach comes. So that's why, Moshe Rabbeinu Goel, Yeshua Goel Achim. So Moshe Rabbeinu will come. He'll come with all this whole nation that he had from the desert. He'll come with every single one of them. He will lead them all into Eretz Yisrael. Mashiach comes. So that's Moshe Rabbeinu. That is Moshe Rabbeinu. That is Moshe, who's willing to give up everything, his physical life, his spiritual life, all for the sake of a Jew. Every single Jew in his generation will not be affected. Surely not through him or from him. And that's why you understand again why Moshe Rabbeinu kept silent. When he saw the Jewish people are silent, he understood that he has to keep silent, not to embarrass one Jew that will be embarrassed. Why didn't you say something? Moshe Rabbeinu has to tell you to say something. It might be embarrass a Jew. Why didn't he say something? Moshe Rabbeinu has to tell him to say something. He knows his community. He's a leader. Again, he gives directives into what the people need. And if the people don't want it, then they're not obligated to do it. He wasn't going to embarrass them. He wasn't going to fashion. And in general, we learned that, there was many rabbis who you should realize, we should all realize, embarrassing somebody is a prohibition in the Torah. A lot of things that you tell somebody is not a prohibition in the Torah. I always tell this to the rabbi, wrote a letter that, when the Baal Korah makes a mistake in reading the Torah, people sometimes scream out and they embarrass him. So making a mistake in the reading is a rabbinical prohibition, and embarrassing him is a Torah prohibition. Keep quiet. Keep quiet. Yeah, maybe. If you're going to embarrass him, better to keep quiet. Because making a mistake is not the end of the world. It's not like he said a wrong, not like he said something. If he said, you're right, if he said something terrible, go change it. But if he made a mistake, he said the word sin, or whatever, people go crazy over. But you have to realize that maybe you're embarrassing the guy. Embarrassing of somebody is a Torah prohibition, and making a mistake is might be a rabbinical concept, and therefore you should not embarrass him. And that's right. Well, the Baal Korah here doesn't care. He wants you to rectify him. So, but not all people. Like I tell you, like bar mitzvah kids. If there's a bar mitzvah kid up there, then you're gonna embarrass him. He worked so hard, so he's making a mistake. If he didn't change the word, if he didn't change the meaning, let him go on. Why would you embarrass him and hurt him? No mitzvah to do that. And embarrassing this bar mitzvah way might be worse than fixing the word that he made a mistake, said.
And he says, I'm leaving this place.
Right.
Well, yeah.
So you have to be
It's
careful.
over with, I'm never coming back.
Right. So we have to be careful. And I would say most things that people try to rectify people might be embarrassing them more than helping them rectify them. You might be embarrassing them. And therefore, you have to be careful in this concept. So therefore, we learned that from Moshe Rabbeinu that he didn't want to embarrass the Jewish nation. And he was willing to give up everything, even his own spiritual gain, not to embarrass the Jewish people. And that's the beauty of this. Let's hope we all continue to learn together for many, many more years. Have a wonderful day. Shem, hope to see you all on Shabbos. Have a wonderful and beautiful day. Beautiful, beautiful. God bless you all.